Hi, everybody. My name is Philip Boutte. I'm the co-founder of 9B Collective Studio, and I'm just going to give everybody here on the panel an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Hey, my name is Mike Uwandi, also co-founder of 9B Studios.
I'm Nicole Hendricks. I'm executive director and co-founder of Brick Foundation, and I'm a producer.
And I'm Allison Mann. I am co-founder of the Brick Foundation, and then I'm also a talent manager and co-president of an animation division at Fourth Wall Management. This topic is all so near and dear to our hearts of the fostering of the next generation of storytellers. We all fancy ourselves as different kind of lands of storytelling and how we've come up in the industry. And so we're hoping that this talk, whether you're education or you're creative or you come from different sectors, will inspire you, give you some takeaways, and you can kind of integrate it in your daily life as you need.
And this is an important topic because the industry just needs more representation and different voices from different levels. And so we always like to start what we're doing with data so you can get a picture of what the industry looks like, and then we'll kind of take it back. I will go through this. Oh, this is who we are, by the way. So I love data, and so we were able to commission this study with Dr. Yalda at Center for Scholars and Storytellers. She's speaking Wednesday. You should check out her talk. And what we did was, through my other company, Concept Art Association, we had 5 years worth of data of every artist that had worked on animation, live action, and gaming. So it ended up being a pretty large data set. And we wanted to look at gender and race with that. So not surprisingly, 75% were male. Sorry, 72% were male, 75% were white. Different industries were a little worse than others, because again, this is looking at live action, animation, and gaming. So gaming skews more male, live action skews more white. And so obviously there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And the reason why making sure that there's representation within artists is important, because many times they're the first people on deck. So with a producer and doing pitch art, and so it's like if we don't have representation at the very beginning of that entertainment pipeline, that can result in other things. Again, I'm gonna go quickly through that. What was interesting, what we found is from when we started this data in 2018 to 2022, you can see we went from 9.8% female to 34.4%, which was a huge win, but we actually decreased with people of color. Don't really know why, but anyways, that was one of the things that was most shocking from the study. I love the work that the USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative is doing. I really recommend checking them out. I put tiny URLs in the bottom so you could see the full studies. Animation is, I would say, the most female-friendly of the entertainment sectors. You can see some stats. But yeah, what's really interesting is women kind of get hung up in different roles and don't really make it to director or to head of a lot of times. Visual effects, this is a more recent report. Definitely gender gaps in visual effects leadership roles. Producers is the most female. That's not surprising. Consider just what we know about gender role and role congruency theories. Those are things that I think are traditionally more accepted for women. And then this is kind of where that pipeline, again, you can kind of see how even in technical roles, just where women are not getting promoted. And so why is that, right?
Yeah, so one of the big things when it comes to the pipeline in general is recognizing where it starts in education. And there's so many things that come up that kind of get in the way of education. And when it comes to minority artists specifically, for one, I can say that I have immigrant parents, and that is a big thing, is to say, doctor or lawyer, that is it. So that's like, if I thought about being an artist, heck to the no, right? So it's one of those things of recognizing that there's already the struggles when it comes to education, as far as like growing up in a certain area where art is not promoted, right? Not support, it's like lack of support. But also when you have that lack of support from your parents, most people just typically fall off when it comes to the educational side of things as far as creativity goes. It's not encouraged. Your friends don't think it's cool, your parents don't think it's cool, no one thinks it's cool, so why would you do it, right? When you have all these other people who are like, you know, going into music or going into sports, entertainment, things like that, you know, it's kind of like it's the last bastion, oftentimes when it comes to education as well. The creative side is usually what's cut first when it comes to schools, especially in impoverished areas. Also recognizing the paywall, which is huge. When I went to Art Center, school was for the whole term, I think it was $20,000 per term. I could not afford that, and I don't think most people can actually afford that. It's a lot of money. And so that's already a huge discouraging factor when it comes to it, because most of the time there's only a certain group that can afford that, and it's people who are in high class, right, or upper middle class. So I want to talk about that, but also for myself, and I know Phil has gone through something similar, when you recognize that there's no one there who looks like you, it's also very discouraging. And it's kind of one of those things where you start to look for everything else rather than following your own internal voice.
Absolutely. And the more, like, a lot of these questions come from, we all work a lot with high schoolers, because year after year we're like, where's the pipeline or pathways broken in? And it just points earlier and earlier. And also just changing where obviously we're recruiting from. And so it starts in high school. I assume a lot of you, I hope a lot of you are high school teachers, because we're going to talk a lot about high school. And play this video that has audio.
So, besides being a teenage dirtbag, I was a lot more in high school and wanted to be a lot more in high school. So I grew up in Northern California in a small town called Santa Rosa. I was in an art high school, and I was a first generation of this art high school. It was they hadn't done it before. It was an amazing experience as far as art goes. However, I always, since I was little, 7 years old, drawing and painting, I wanted to be an animator, like a 2D animator. I saw all the Disney movies in my teenage years. It was the Ren and Stimpies of the world, or the Daria, or even Beavis and Butthead. Like, those are the Eon Flux. Like, I was inspired by all these artists. And so the studio makeup, or the school makeup at the time, was driven by somebody who was from a fine artist background. And so we spent a lot of time doing different really cool projects, but when it came down to how and why or what I wanted to pursue ultimately in my career, I went to my teacher and I was like, I want to be a 2D animator. And she's like, Allison, 2D animation's dead. You have to pick a different career. Well, the internet wasn't what it was. I didn't get the internet until I was 21 years old. And so in the 90s, I didn't really have the accessibility to do the research. And so I hung on to those words of my teacher, and who said, you can't do this. But she didn't really know alternative pathways. At the time, she couldn't be like, well, 2D animation might not be viable, but here's some alternative career paths. If you want to draw, you can become a storyboard artist, character designer. If you want to do 2D animation, maybe you need to go pursue the commercial divisions of our entertainment industry. But she just wasn't packed with that knowledge. So I ended up going to Santa Rosa Junior College after school, partially because I had to pay through my own school as well. And so I wanted to get all my GED stuff out of the way, got an AA in liberal arts, and then I ended up transferring to Columbia College Chicago. And in both ways, both of my schools, I got to continue taking art classes, painting classes. I went to Columbia College because I could major in business and then still do all the art as well, and it was a good balance for me. And then I ended up interning at a casting company, and then also at Nickelodeon Animation Studio. And so all those artists that I was inspired by, I finally got to work with them, but my internship was in finance, which was, I suck at numbers. I was horrible with math. I'm also dyslexic, so I had learning disabilities growing up. And so it was not like the area, it was in the sector I wanted to be, but definitely not where I wanted to ultimately end up. And so I ended up going, graduating from school, kept in touch with everyone at Nick, and then ended up getting two job offers, one being PA on Go Diego Go, and the other one was working in special events. And one of those jobs in special events was dividing up all the portfolios and handing them out to all the productions. And lo and behold, I found kind of my true calling. While I ended up not pursuing drawing or a career in being an artist in our industry, I found a job that combined the business and then the support for the artists and then the education side. So I became a creative recruiter, and then I ended up running the internship program for Nickelodeon and MTV networks. And so it really combined all these different aspects. I got to help mentor and support the individuals and kind of play whack-a-mole to all those myths of what type of roles people can have, that you don't have to just be the lead singer of a band, that there's so many other alternative roles in our industry that can be really fulfilling. And so I was a creative recruiter for Nickelodeon, the Walt Disney Animation Studio, ended up working on Princess and the Frog. So all of those artists, again, that I wanted to be or inspired me to be in the industry, I ended up hiring all of them for this project. I went from Disney, I worked in gaming for about 5 years, and then I went into back to animation with Paramount, then Illumination, and then my last corporate job was VP of Creative Strategy over at Sony Pictures Animation. And my job was to read scripts and then figure out what the visual language of the project should be. So things that they were doing on Spider-Verse. I would research all these artists from all around the world and then figure out what the visual language for these projects should be moving forward and help figure out the design language. And that was amazing. And then recently, to go with why I'm in this industry and what drives me, is that wanting to help individuals, and especially when you look at the stats, where there's not a ton of female filmmakers, and there's still not. I fight every single day just for people to get an interview, and diversity is still a real big challenge as far as it being looked at as a risk. Whether you're female or you are from a diverse background, it's still equal a risk in our industry. So I took on a job through my executive career way to really help drive that home as much as possible.
Same thing. I think everybody has their own path, right? When you come into, especially entertainment, the paths aren't the same. I got into entertainment when I was 3. I was an actor from about 3 until 17 or so. So most of my formative years were spent being on TV or going back and forth and doing commercials and different things and different television shows. And what that did is it kind of gave me a platform of knowing that I wanted to do entertainment and knowing that I wanted to kind of combine my love of art. I just wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do it. And so when you talk about backgrounds, the background that I had was being in entertainment from a young age was really exciting for me and fun. As I transitioned into a teen actor, I got frustrated. I remember getting frustrated. I think it was the first time that I really recognized that diversity was an issue. Because of the roles that I was being offered. So I was being offered roles for big time television shows, but every single role was exactly the same. It was a drug dealer or a gang member or something super negative, right? Where I was just like, okay, I can maybe play one of those because that's outside of, who I am, right, as a person. But then I started to get frustrated and say, where are the people that are like me and my family? Both of my parents graduated from UCLA. We were upper middle class, and a lot of my friends were the exact same way. So I just didn't see, in my experience, the lifestyle that they wanted me to portray black men on TV specifically as all the time, or in my day-to-day, and it was frustrating. So I said, you know what, the one thing that I like to do is draw, so I'm gonna go to college, and I'm gonna learn how to kind of combine my love of art with my love of entertainment for something that I've been doing, right? And so that's when I went to Cal State Long Beach, and during that time there, I had a few professors that kind of explained to me, because of the background of art not being pushed specifically in the black community as much as it could be, and then having programs constantly kind of yanked out from under you, I kind of felt behind, when I first started. So I felt like I was trying to catch up with people or kids that had already been drawing and they had been in programs all the way up until college. And that was frustrating, right? But I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna try and figure it out. And a teacher told me once, they basically said, it was something along the lines of, you have to be versatile in order to be able to kind of grab jobs as need be. And at first I saw that as a weakness, kind of being like, okay, well, I have to be able to spread myself out and spread myself thin. But it actually ended up working itself out in my favor because as I got out of school, if I worked on a project, like I work on a Marvel film, I could do that style. If I work on, something that is a little bit more comic booky, like Kingsman, I could change the style to comic book. So it's like it allowed me the ability for growth and change, but it also allowed me to stay on projects just because my portfolio was diverse. I could change my style depending on what I needed to design or what I needed to draw. And I think that was a beneficial thing in the long run because it allowed me to grab whatever opportunity came to me. And I think that was something that had I not had professors that kind of taught me how to do that, I probably would have honed in quicker. I would have been like, I'm going to go to this trade school and only learn how to draw this way. And I think that would have been to my detriment.
Yeah, so for myself, similar to Phil, I've been kind of involved for a while, but I always was drawing since I was 3 years old, which is a long time. But funny enough, I didn't get access to the internet until I was 20, which, being someone who graduated in 2004, that's a cool minute. What's that, 2007, 2006, something like that. So I was way behind. I stopped drawing for about 10 years before I got back into the arts because I started to get bored. I was like, okay, I'm drawing, but where is this headed, right? I didn't see a means to an end. And eventually with my parents as well, also saying like, hey, there's no career there, specifically my dad, there's no career there. I was like, all right, you know what? Sorry. There's no career there. I kind of just got discouraged. And along with all of that combined, it just was like, well, yeah, I guess I'll go into medical school. And if it wasn't for my friends who actually showed me the internet, they were like, hey, you should look at this thing. Look, there's this website called DeviantArt that had all these artists. And I was like, what? There's artists who draw on their computers? Like, to think I was so behind, I was like, oh, well, that's crazy. And I was like so enthused though. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But yeah, I stopped drawing so long ago. I guess it's like there's a way to go after that now. And more, I started to see my friends like really kind of help encourage and push me to say like, no, you can do it. You were like so good back then. You can really go after it. And they gave me a sketchbook and I got the bug. And I was like, oh, this is addictive. I forgot how this felt. But it was one of those things of just access, right? If I didn't have those friends who were showing me like the internet and showing me these things like DeviantArt, I would have just never went after that. I would have forgotten about it actually until, I'd probably see someone like Phil on TV and I'm like, oh, what? That could have been me, right? So I think a big part of that is just like recognizing the lack of access, right? I come from a good home, bad area, where essentially I had no idea that these things existed, and there's many more people who have no idea that these things exist. I went to talk one day at a school in Compton, and there was all these kids who were just like loving this video game that I worked on a long time ago. So I was just talking to them about the arts and stuff like that. And they were like really like, whoa, you exist? So confused, right? And when I start to talk about art, one of the first things they ask is, well, how much do they make? How do you go about it? And things like that. Also recognizing, once again, this is only the beginning of COVID. So 2020? And these kids didn't even know that this was a career choice as well. Once we started talking to them and stuff like that, the teacher took a video of the room and all the kids were drawing. And it was like one of those things where you recognize the power of impact. When you see that as long as someone knows better, they can do better, right? And informing everyone like, hey, this is an opportunity, this is a way out. When it comes to teachers and how they can help when stuff like that is just recognizing someone's potential and saying, hey, I'm gonna help, I'm gonna kind of put these things in front of you. You don't have to force it, you don't have to push it, but just allowing them to recognize that there's multiple options rather than just the things that we're all used to. When it comes to myself, like I said, I went to Cal State Fullerton first, and that was me going into medical school. And though I enjoyed it, I always felt like I was not being fully fulfilled, like at all. I was just like, yeah, this is great, but there's like a whole nother part of me that's creative, and I love helping people, but at the same time, there's like something that's not being fostered within myself. And luckily, I was fortunate to be around really great friends, really great people who then start to propel me forward. But 12 years away is usually discouraging for a lot of people, 10 to 12. And also, the age, right? I started again at 24, which most people would say, oh, that's like too old to get started. But, I was just really fortunate. I think that it's a huge thing to just encourage folk to like, hey, you can do it. It doesn't matter your age. There's always a possibility of actually succeeding as long as it's a showcase of how badly you want it at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I was the kid that moved a lot. So I moved almost every year, and I got to stay put a little bit in Alabama, and every single place I went to, I remember being like in second grade, and I was like, but I was in the gifted program in my last school, and then like I could get in sometimes, but not every time, because they don't test you every year. And the reason why getting into that gifted program was always important to me, it's because how do I quickly, within the first couple weeks in a new school, convince an educator that like I'm worthy of investing in? Like when you're in the gifted program, teachers do tend to treat you a little different in terms of just that amount of trust and like, all right, we're gonna go on this field trip. And so I didn't have just the easiest time at home. So I think I put a lot of effort into this like school existence, which is why every new school, it's like, hello, you don't know me yet, but I can do things, so fighting to get on to like a basketball team if I could at each school, or fighting to get on the yearbook, right? And so I think that it's just really, I think a lot of my drive as an individual, as a producer, as an entrepreneur, just is kind of built into me of just always being like, hi, you don't know me yet, but I promise I'm worth investing in. And I will say I definitely challenged my educators and any person in power quite a bit. And so I think that the teachers that really saw me, like I was very lucky at Sac State that I had a professor, Steve Buss, who saw me and saw that I'm not great at, if I just give her a random assignment, she might not even show up to my class. But if I give her credit for all of these short films that she's doing every weekend, and that she's on everybody's project and she's a project person, like definitely would not have graduated without that man giving me like independent study for all the projects that I was doing. And I think it's just like you can always count back to those people that took a chance on you, because those are the moments that can change your life, not to be dramatic. I was that kid that was building really ugly websites for people at age like 12 as one of my first businesses. So it was, to me, internet and technology was the closest thing to magic that exists in this world. So I was always like very interested in it. And that I would say, like, always being interested in what is new, what is happening, and then bringing that love of learning with me and figuring things out, and then in a project way, is something that I've been able to channel in through most of my time. And so I think, like, for me, it's really just as an educator, like seeing your new kids that come in, seeing that the teachers that had me at the beginning of the day never really saw me, because I was a very different kid, like 7th, 8th period, right? Like by that time I'm into all like my leadership roles or whatever. So I think it's just also seeing that kids are different times of day for many reasons, seeing that not every kid's gonna be able to just be lectured at. Like I can't just listen to a lecture and take notes. I'm gonna be very bored and act out a bit, right? But if you like give me a project, that will be great. So I think it's just really understanding that there's just different types of learning and trying to, empower that.
Yeah, so story time. There was a time when I started off at Academy of Art, and a teacher actually kind of helped push me out, where he was like, hey, I noticed that you're a lot more serious about this than most of the other students. You should go to the school called Art Center. And I was like, oh, okay, what's Art Center? Where is that? And he's like, oh, it's in Pasadena. And I'm like, goodness gracious, I just came from LA. I'm in the Bay now, and now he's basically telling me to go back home, right? And so trying to tell my parents, hey guys, I kind of want to come back home. They're like, all right, look, we gave you as much support as we could. You figure it out. So basically I had to try and figure that out. Came back home and, heard about this art center school, got to walk around the school and saw like art that was insane, like crazier than anything I had seen. Because prior to that, I was like now browsing the internet finally and was noticing like, oh, the level here is really good. And I went to Art Center and I was like, oh man, like the level was way higher than what I was used to seeing on the internet. And so, you know, for the longest, my friends and family were like, well, that school is $20,000 cash. You're not going to be able to afford that. At least the Academy of Art was like $10,000, right? And I was like, all right, well, I'll figure it out. And based on all the things I had gone through prior, I had this weird internal belief in myself that like, oh yeah, I'll just keep on working towards this thing and we'll figure it out. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Well, eventually they had this thing called Portfolio Day where all the schools on the West Coast would come to to Art Center campus and would look at everyone's work and say like, yeah, you can get into my school, you can't get into my school. Well, I treated it like I did anything and waited save the best for last, so to speak. So all the other schools I went to go and check out and I showed my work, they're like, yeah, man, you can definitely come to our school. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting it, right? And I started to get this confidence. And then eventually I was like walking in there with my chest out and everything. And I was like, all right, time to go and approach Art Center, show them my portfolio. I show them my portfolio and the lady says, ew. And I was like, what? What do you mean ill? Right? She was not impressed. And she's like, so are you trying to get into the program this year or next year? Because you're a long ways out. Of course, I got a little deflated. And I was like, all right, well, that doesn't feel too good. And she was like, yeah, you know, I think that you can build up a lot of skills in this time. But yeah, you're definitely not going to get in here this time. Sorry. And I turned around and I was like, all right, long walk of shame back to the car. Right? And of course, I'm like sitting there barking to my then girlfriend, and I'm like, yeah, you know, I can do so much better. This isn't even the best I can do. And she's like, well, if you want to do better, then you kind of got to show better, you know? And I just was silent because that was like the first time she said anything, and the time she said something, it hurt. So, so I got to work, and the portfolios were due in a week. So I sat there and was like ultra determined, ultra fired up, did 30 new pages, 100 and something drawings in that week, submitted it, and that same recruiter calls, which never happens, right? And she's like, hey, I just want to make sure, I saw that you applied to our school. Is this the same person I met? And she describes me, and I'm like, yeah. And then she was like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I'm sure, this is me. And then she's like, okay, well, I know you want to start in the winter, but would you be down to start in the summer? And we can give you a $8,000 scholarship, right? And I was like, oh, that's awesome. But I was also ashamed to admit, even with that $8,000 scholarship, I did not have enough money to afford Art Center, right? $8,000 a semester. So I was like, actually, thanks a lot, but unfortunately, I can't afford that. And then she was like, okay, I'll probably talk to you later. And then she calls me back 5 minutes later. Okay, here's the deal. We can give you a $20,000 scholarship. We can basically give you a free ride. You just have to make sure that you maintain this, this, and that. And I was like, okay, right? Didn't have a car, didn't have any resources, didn't have a computer, but I was like, yes, thumbs up. And so go and tell my parents, and all of a sudden, of course, they're all aboard. They're like, yeah, I knew you could do it. I'm like, wait, you just told me I couldn't do this. All right, whatever. So, so it was one of those things where because I had someone kind of looking at me for the first time and actually giving me that real support, I really felt like I couldn't let her down as well as I couldn't let myself down. And that extra really it carried me through, right? It almost gave me a little chip on my shoulder that eventually ended up helping me in the long run. And one of those things that I recognize is I didn't want anyone else to feel the way I was feeling coming up, where I think there was a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities for me to kind of give up, right? Like so many times, oh, this school that you're going to is not a good school. All right, that's one thing. Okay, now you're at Art Center, but you can't afford it. Okay, that's another thing. Then you're not having resources, and everyone else has these amazing resources. That's another part, right? It's so many things that would just eventually knock down someone, but to keep on going and then recognizing like we don't want other people to go through what we've gone through is like a huge thing. And I think props to that recruiter, because a lot of times when it comes to recruitment, it can be something as simple as just passing through names, right, on a board and just like, yeah, nope, this person doesn't get through, this person get through. But the fact that she remembered me and then also gave me that chance, really helped catapult me to then helping others. So it's kind of like a huge domino effect, but in a positive direction, where she helped one person, but eventually I'm able to help hundreds, right? So it's a huge benefit when it comes to like just making sure that the students are being seen, right? Because everyone learns a little bit differently, and sometimes they're not showing their full potential. Maybe they're living up to the situation, right? But if you raise the situation, you raise the stakes, they might live up to that, and recognizing the potential in people who have that. Similar to Nicole and the gifted program thing, is similar for myself. There's many people who I've even been able to test through mentorship through our jobs, where we're able to say, I think you can do more, so I'm gonna put more on you, and they actually do rise to that occasion.
There's something really, thanks, Mike. There was something really interesting about when you, as an educator, right, inspiring the next generation, just showing them that they can do something or believing in them is a huge plus, right? So having people, I've felt lucky throughout my entire career, or just even from starting until now, to feel supported. Like, my parents always supported art, so I didn't have the blocker where I felt like someone was not gonna support what I wanted to do. It just was always like, if you're going to do this, you need to be the best at it, and you need to do your best job at pushing yourself and staying engaged and being involved. I've had some educators, I think I'll tell a few stories, which is, one is, I remember when you talk about representation or just thinking about something or knowing, if you know better, you'll be better type deal that Mike said. I remember in elementary school in California, we would have rainy day auditorium sessions or whatever, right? So if it was raining, instead of playing outside, you'd come into the auditorium and you'd watch a movie, or sometimes the teachers would have like an assembly or something. And one day in particular, I remember it was raining, and we knew it was going to be raining, and so they had scheduled a marionette puppeteer to come, and he did the story of Aladdin with marionette puppets, and it had all these moving parts and sets, and it was just really engaging and super creative. Now, granted, I didn't go into doing that, but that had to have been like second or third grade, and I still remember it, right? So it was just seeing it that one time reminded me. So it's like, what if there was some people that wanted to do that? So now, being able to go back and talk to kids at a very early age, and then also talking to their parents, has been super important to us, to make sure that they know how to support their kid that wants to do art, but just showing up at them seeing us is important. When I got into the college, I was very, I think the first year, I was a little downtrodden, because I remember always having friends that were older than me, right? So I was the kid that, like, when I was in 9th grade, all my friends were seniors, and then I was like, that was a mistake, because now they're all gone, right? So I was like, I learned that. And then when I got to college, I remember, because I was always a good student, so I always had good grades, right? And I remember by the senior year, I was just coasting along. I already knew that I was going to college. It was the whole thing, right? So I was bored. But I was excited about college because I was like, this is where the real learning happens. Like, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do art, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And then I got there and they're like, okay, you're gonna take political science and Spanish and math. And I was like, why? Like, I don't wanna do that anymore, right? And so getting through that point, when I finally got to my art classes, you have art history and all of those different things, right? And I remember one teacher in particular, it was Dr. Kleinfelder. I'll never forget her, because she's a teacher that was able to take something like, art history can be pretty dense and kind of boring. Like, it's the class where everybody falls asleep, right? And then you have to like study the last minute to try to remember all these dates, right? That's just the way that it works. Especially for someone like me who's a visual learner. I don't learn well audio and like even just looking at stuff. Like, I would rather, instead of memorizing something, I can actually see the page in my head, so I can go back and recall visually. But if you just tell me stuff, it's in one ear and out the other. My wife will tell you that whenever she tells me to go to the grocery store, right? I can't remember what she said, and I come back with all the wrong things, unless it's something that's written down for me. Dr. Kleinfelder, she saw students as they were. So when I talk to educators, I remember to tell them it's really important to see students as they are, and then see how they learn, and not just blanket the education to teaching everything one way. So Kleinfelder taught art history like gossip. She taught it like, it's true, she taught it like gossip. So she'd teach it, she'd say, Toulouse-Lautrec was over here hanging out with these ballerinas and these people, but then he was friends with this artist. And like, it just felt like, like a episode of like one of those housewives shows, right? But at the end of it, we'd all show, like, we were all surprised. You'd show up on test day, And they'd be like, when's Picasso's pink period? And I could tell you that. Like, I knew the date, I knew where he was, I knew who his friends were. It was really crazy, like kind of bizarre. And I had never had someone that taught it in that way. You know, she dressed up. So when she was teaching us about Dadaism, she dressed up in a full like German outfit, and she had a pointer, and she's like, "What is Dada?" And she's like pointing at the things. Like, it was really just incredible, you know. And that was way back. I mean, I graduated, I think, in 2006. I don't think I'll ever forget her just because of the way she taught it. It was one of the most engaging classes I had. And so, when thinking about kind of how that put me into, you know, a different category to be able to go back and mentor students and talk to them, I'm always looking for a way to engage with them personally. We did these portfolio reviews, right? As artists, we do portfolio reviews where we look at your portfolio, just like Mike was talking about, at an event called Lightbox last year, Lightbox Expo. And I was in the middle of a portfolio review, and the girl in front of me just starts crying. And I thought I did something wrong. I didn't know. And I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "No one's ever told me I could do this before." Oh. So when you think about that, just her feeling seen and feeling like she had a place to be, kind of reinvigorated not only the way that we think about things, but also like in understanding that sometimes it's not complicated, it's very simple. It's just about telling someone that you do see them, you understand where they are, and that they can learn and that they have the ability. I mean, it really helps carry you forward.
I always find in our world, it's all very structured. It's like we are going through the world in a checkbox. But as you see, none of us in this room are checkboxes. And so how do we survive? How do we get from kindergarten or TK all the way to 12th, where you can then move forward and pursue the thing that you really wanted to do? And sometimes I think all those words that were up on there, the imposter syndrome, the lack of access, just whatever it is, that barrier to entry, it's there, and it can be for all these kiddos that want to pursue these opportunities, and there's a lot of them. When I think of just these stories and like us coming back and bringing the accessibility, that is also why we give these talks and we create the things that we do and the companies that we create. So we formed a nonprofit called the Brick Foundation. This was during my time when I was working at Illumination. I had been working in the industry, now it's been over 20 years, but at the time I think it might have been year 17. And I realized from working at every single one of these studios, gaming industry, tech, animation, feature, TV, we were all having conversations around diversity and inclusion and how to build these access points. But nobody was under one roof talking. When I would go to schools and I would give talks, all the teachers were talking about it. You read Variety or Deadline, and there's different initiatives that are popping up on the government side. So we thought if we brought all these different parts together and create an opportunity where people can come under one roof to solve, how do we make a difference? How do we make sure we get to people by the age of 6? Like, we know that girls by the age of 6, they can get discouraged from really pursuing the thing that they want. So the early education, like the high school, just really bringing it. So BRIC stands for Break, Reinvent, Impact, and Change. And our goal is to increase representation in the entertainment, gaming, and tech space by building community and connecting and being a connector of that specific change.
And I kind of came at it from the other angle of, because I went into broadcast and advertising and what have you and gaming, I was often the only female-looking human in the room, and I was like the 20-year-old where all my friends were like 40-year-old white men, which I love. They all showed up to my wedding, right? But it's just like that. Those are my peers. And so I think that I realized, again, referencing role congruency theory, there's just different words that define leadership for different genders. And if there had been more women above me, like, it would have been just very different in terms of styles and communication. And I do think that us coming together has really helped with that. We have a video with audio.
This is momentum, a motion of conversation.
A symphony of thought.
United. to increase representation,
to create new access points,
and improve the employment pipeline.
helping individuals grow as future creative leaders.
that means making room,
Amplifying voices, empowering perspectives, fostering connections,
And creating spaces for thought leaders to come together.
helping make every space
An inclusive space.
building upon ideas,
forming partnerships,
and focusing on sustainability
Instead of reinventing the wheel,
now, tomorrow, and in the future.
there is always work to be done. But we know we are stronger together. Get involved, inspire others.
and take action.
Time to break, reinvent, impact, change.
Join us in transforming the industry brick by brick at brickfoundation.org.
And now we get to 9B. Me, Mike, and our fellow co-founder, Aldis Hodge, who's not here, started 9B Collective in the height of the pandemic, basically in 2020. We saw a need for change. We had an event that was also co-put on by one of Nicole's companies, the Concept Art Association. It was a drink and draw, and which is where artists come and there's like models and you draw from the theme and you're at a bar, you know, that type of deal. What it highlighted very quickly was that there wasn't enough representation behind the scenes in the art scene, and then there wasn't a lot of opportunity there, and also there wasn't a lot of opportunity for artists of color to work together on projects. So I recognize that I started drawing, professionally for films in 2007. The first time that I sat next to another Black artist was 2019. So that's the very first time that I had another artist that looked like me with me. It was a very long time, ended up meeting Mike. And what we strive to do, we're the first Black-owned concept art collective studio. And all of our artists are primarily BIPOC. So we try to provide an opportunity for the studio system to truly hire diversely. So where there's not only artists of color working on projects, but we try to give them a voice and say, and a place of equity, while also making sure that they're able to work together. I think that that was a key component in starting the company, just in realizing that people did need a community. Because I know most of you remember, it's just 2020 was rough. It was hard. There was like something happening every single month. It was like going from like quarantine to like murder hornets. And then there was like George Floyd. Like there was just all these things that just kind of combined into like feeling the need to be actionable and not just be the person that complains, but to say, okay, we recognize that there's a need here, let's fix it, right? So most of my friends, especially from that time on, have become very actionable people where, I can tell Nicole and Allison, this place needs a community center, and then they'll like make it. They just build it. Like it just happens. And I've never seen that type of response. But that's kind of why we exist and what we're about.
And going off of the actionable bit, one of the things we want to do is put our money where our mouth is, right? And when it comes to the mentorship, we recognize the things that we didn't have, all of us collectively, and being seen and recognizing other people's potential rather than their experience. Because a lot of times, as we all know in this room, I'm sure, when you go for a job, they'll say, okay, well, what else have you done? And it's like, well, I'm trying to get my first chance. I'm trying to get my foot in the door, right? So we want to make sure that we really recognize these artists and their potential, seeing where they're at and where they can be. So it's kind of a lift as we rise type of situation where as we move up and the way we've moved up, we want to make sure that we encourage others to do so. And that changes many things, many things in the industry as a whole. One of the things is a lot of times in the industry, it can get kind of bitter, it can get kind of nasty, get kind of cutthroat a little bit. But if you help people, right, and they recognize like, oh, well, this person helped me get into the industry, what do? They repeat that action. Right, so that already starts to kind of change the way the industry is towards each other, right? The other part of it is making sure that we give people chances to learn under other senior artists, because sometimes when it comes to learning on your own, yeah, you're learning on your own, but a lot of the companies tend to set people up to fail in some of the worst ways, unfortunately, where they'll say, all right, you know what, finally we'll give you this chance because we need you. And then what happens? They kind of drop the ball, and then what that does for the company is, oh, well, we won't hire people like that. And then what that does for the artist is, oh man, I guess I wasn't good enough. And that's really discouraging. So we make sure that we actually front load projects where we balance it in the sense of giving the seniors a lot and giving the juniors an opportunity to see what the seniors are doing. And what we've noticed, which is like really amazing, is that these artists start to like kind of want to take on more because their confidence is starting to build up. So one of those things is what confidence does for artists, especially because unfortunately as artists, we're sensitive by nature. But we want to make sure that these artists are getting that chance, because what eventually happens is they start to hire diversely as well, right? Namely, what happens in any industry is people tend to gravitate towards people who look like them or come from similar backgrounds, right? So if we start to encourage people like, hey, let's, you know, you come to the industry, we hire you, we got you in a nice way, right? And then you start to help other people out in a nice way. And then you eventually start to hire people who look like you or come from your background. And then they start to do that, and it starts to multiply, and it creates a more balanced situation. So the other thing that we wanted to do is we go to different schools. He's gone to Detroit. We've both gone to Detroit. We've gone to South Africa as well. We've gone to schools in the inner city, and we just make sure that we're seen. That alone encourages a lot of them, but also giving them practical advice, right? Because it's one thing to say, you're good, and give them a thumbs up. It's another thing to tell them, yes, you're good, but here's what you can do with it. One of the things that we've recognized as far as like education is there's a lack of, when it comes to art, a lot of times we've noticed that minorities tend to gravitate towards animation, like as far as animating, doing the hard work, or comic books, which is also very hard work, right? But none of those things are fully encouraging them to think in the sense of like, you're a designer, you're a problem solver, have this, right? And a lot of that comes from the lack of knowledge within the community as a whole. Most people don't know that concept art or even product design is a thing. So what do? It's like, I can only go off of what my dad says, but it's, oh, so you're going to draw cartoons, right? And it's like, oh, word, that's not the only thing that I can do, right? Or you are going to draw comic books. And it's like, no, there's other things too that are hard work, yes, but not as hard as that, but encourages my mind to think, because a lot of times it's really easy to get discouraged once you're bored, which is a situation that I think a lot of us on this panel have faced. And so really trying to propel these artists to also kind of spread their awareness and also help out other people. And eventually you see, like with the things like what Phil worked on, Black Panther, what that did for a generation, we hope to also foster in the new generation and educate them, and recognizing that it's not just about what you look like and what you can do, it's also your full potential, and also helping out other people, and recognizing as well that your, so to speak, your weakness can also be your superpower as well. So we want to foster that in with the next generation.
It's really interesting. I was watching a documentary on CNN last night around the 90s, and specifically like the music, and how much art, like, I think Alanis Morissette said it. It was like how much art and music creates, like, it gives the formative of what the decade is going to look like, the political landscape, the culture. Like, art is the driver of that. Like, the creative force behind it is what really builds that. And so you think of, for me, I also played soccer for a really long time, and I think of how sometimes, not all the time, but a lot of sports has a lot of diversity. And there's a lot of accessibility as far as starting to track artists early on, like in middle school and high school, and get them to college. And imagine if art had the same thing, if we had the sports recruiting method into the arts, and there was the support as educators you had from studios or colleges, and we all worked together as a community to make that change. That it wasn't just on studio recruiters to just try to find somebody, or if it wasn't for
I think it's really about everybody working together in terms of, you need educators working with industry, you need parents working with educators, you need government, because there's a lot of different funding things happening right now, specifically around, the creative economy and strong workforce, where there's a lot of funding for these initiatives. So let's leverage apprenticeship movements and pre-apprenticeship programs to really use them as pathways for diversity. And so I think bringing everyone together is the way to go.
Yeah, it's definitely a trifecta of all those things coming together. And so you look at the mentorship that's coming from 9B, and then BRIC having the first register apprentice program in the state of California. That's been pretty huge as well.
Yeah, and so we're going to open it up for Q&A, but what I also, oh, no, that's not true, actually. But yeah, we can, so if you're using the Slido app, but what I will say too is there are a lot of programs that both BRIC and 9B does. We really enjoy the partnership with them. Full disclosure, I also work with them. But it is very much, we have the apprenticeship program. They're an apprenticeship employer. You can learn more about that. I think I have some pre-apprenticeship people working with us that are here today. We do a lot of community events because, again, it's just getting access, having kids bring their parents, you know, just really seeing like your child's not going to be a starving artist. These are good jobs with pensions. They're union jobs, a lot of them, and what have you. And yeah, email us.
Yeah, please. We and we also we really are encouraging of trying to, if there's a company that wants to come and work with us or something, we've often said let's amplify the signal, meaning that we are down to work together because we know that we're stronger that way. Yeah.
Yes, we will put these slides on brickfoundation.org's site, but give me 2 days, please. But it'll be there. Also, if you subscribe to our newsletter, we'll send this in our newsletter without some of the high school photos. So with that said, with art being the first thing usually cut from budgets, what sort of conversations can we have with districts? That to me is where I think that, I mean, I'm from Alabama, obviously, so CTE or career technical education was like automotive and cosmetology at my school. In California, it's AME sector. I know there's a lot of nationwide AME movements. I really recommend getting involved in those and bringing that to your school because there's money there if you are teaching your arts in a career-focused way to get computer labs, to get software and what have you. Anybody else have a question that speaks to them?
Let me see. With art being, oh, it's gone. Let's see if it goes back to it.
That was the one I just answered.
Oh, so got it. Okay. Let's say the one with art being cut from budgets?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Based on your K through 12 experience, which subject areas that aren't art electives have the greatest opportunity for deeper integration for creative opportunities? I think that one of the things that, especially with art, right? If you're going into it, I think it's really important for kids to learn structure. And I think that some of the programs that I had that weren't art-based at all was things like learning to type or learning to be a self-starter or learning how to organize things. I think that those are all things that help me now that you wouldn't think about as an artistic career path, or even just public speaking, learning how to public speak or how to communicate. I've had several bosses, I think especially early on in my art career, before I felt like I was good, where I'd say, why did you hire me? I know I wasn't the best artist for this job. And they'd say, I'd rather work with someone that I could be around every day than to work with someone that's really talented and awful, right? So there's a lot of different skill sets in there that you need to learn that aren't art-based.
Yeah, and I see this one that says, how do we help kids see the opportunities? Or were you about to speak?
Yeah, I was just going to add to Phil really fast I had an art teacher in junior college, and he had us do these paintings. They were like life drawing or life paintings, and we spent weeks on them. And then we got to class one day, and he changed the whole setting. And he goes, "You're going to paint over your painting now." And there was something about not being overly precious, I think, as artists, and especially I think kids these days are wanting to be perfectionists with everything they're doing. If you can teach how to critique early, if you can teach about, and something he said is if you can do it once, pretty strongly, you can do it better, and most of the time you have the blueprint and you're going to do even better the second time around. So I think if we can help students let go of that energy, I think kind of opening up that creative energy, it will help foster so many opportunities in my mind.
And just to tag off of that, not necessarily from an art perspective, but producer, because again, there's many roles within the art industry that aren't necessarily artists. I can barely draw a square. It looks like a D. But I am so having a spreadsheet class or having a money class where it's especially where you can see that time is money, and just kind of breaking it down by hours, and any type of projects that you're giving to your students where people are in jobs, where it's like, this is not, the three of you are doing a project, it's like, you're the art director, you're the artist, you're the writer, and just actually getting people to be in those collaborative roles, because the industry is very collaborative, and you have to stay in your lane sometimes the more you go up. Like, the bigger the budget, the smaller your lane. And then Mike, you.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to go for the next question.
Good, yeah.
So how do we help kids see the opportunities or careers that are out there for creatives, especially if we don't know all the options that are out there? So funny enough, went through this as well. And one of the best ways, I think Phil, he has a story that he'll probably piggyback off of. But when it comes to thinking about the jobs that are out there for creatives, it's the easiest and simplest way that I've found to think about it is anything that you enjoy to look at, there's a job for that. Right? So if you're saying like, oh, there's a Batmobile, well, someone had to design that car. Oh, I love that person's costume. Someone had to design that. Oh, the lighting is really good. That's a job, right? And like just understanding that like everything that you see is someone's job. And sometimes it might present itself in some of the weirdest ways. Like, I would love for you to tell this story because it's so funny.
I find that oftentimes, especially with art, there's a disconnect. Like people disconnect from things, right? So when you go to Target to buy a shirt, you don't think about the fact that someone sat there and designed that shirt, right? You just pick out the shirt because you like the shirt. I saw a girl on Twitter and I was like, oh child, she said something, she said something like, I don't even understand why we need farmers anymore because we have the grocery store. And I was like, oh my God. So like, it was like, I was like, back up. So it's kind of one of those ones where I think there's a disconnect. I had a little girl in my neighborhood that really just she was artistic, right? And her parents came to me and they say, she's so artsy, she's artistic, but they said it like, we don't know what's wrong with her, like that type of deal. Like we don't know what to do, right? And they are not artistic people at all. So they just were looking like we don't know how to support her, right? And so I said, okay, well, let's sit down. What does she like to do? And it's like every 5 or 6 months or so, she just completely changes her room around. She's in a polka dots or she's into stripes or whatever. And I was like, oh, she's an interior designer. And they're like, what's that? And I literally just had to leave the house. I was like, I don't understand how you don't know that this is a job. So I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back. And then from there, I said, this is what an interior designer is. There's an interior designer named Kelly Westler. She does like a lot of like hotels and fancy stuff, right? But she's in the master class. So I gave them my subscription to master class and had her watch this. That little girl now is probably maybe around my daughter's age, like 12. And she's fully into interior design. Like she loves it. So by the time she gets to even high school, she might be really, really good at it, right? But it's like, that's all it really takes. Because right now what everybody wants to do is they'll tell you like, oh, graphic design, or comic books, and they just keep plugging one thing. You can design logos. It's like, that's not what I like to do. That's font. Like, and they just don't understand. So the key thing is just to know that there is something.
And it really just comes down to exposure. Exposure is like the biggest thing. And sometimes it's really in the most obvious places, but we just tend to skip over it. Like if you watch a movie and at the end of the movie they have, or the end of the DVD, does anyone use DVDs anymore? I don't know, but that's showing my age. Yeah. But like at the end of a DVD, they kind of have the behind the scenes type of stuff, right? And when you look at those behind the scenes things, it's like, yeah, there's the director, there's the producers, but there's also the artist who's talking about how he designed this creature or how he shot this scene and what emotions were coming up and things like that. So it's just really easy and best to pay attention to all the things around us and then ask the question why.
Thank you all so much for having us today. We have had a great time and we're around if you want to talk to us and learn more about our programs.